Hello. Okay, hopefully we're live. So, welcome to the Detectives Trilogy. So, this is basically three story poems that I wrote about various detectives over time, and I'll briefly explain each one before I do it. So, in this video, I'm just going to do the first two because the third one's about 20 odd minutes long, so I'll do that separate. So, the first one is we have a swig of booze, and then I'll do the first one. So this first one is I wrote this years and years and years ago, at least 10. And so a couple of friends, Gemma and H, if they're watching, they have their own webpage called Shock Tales and Vomit because they create their own cocktails and sometimes they're not very nice and mess with your tummy. But when I heard that, I said, that sounds like your detective names. So I wrote this very short story poem for them, about them. So it's just called Shock Tales and Vomit. Detective Shock Tales and Sergeant Vomit, solving crimes like Wallace and Gromit, chasing down the bad guys on their BMX bikes before reading them their wrongs instead of reading them their rights. Then down at the station, being chewed out by the chief before repairing to the pub next door for some liquid relief. Then back on the beat, wobbly on their feet, with lots of squeals from the bicycle's wheels. Then, there goes a bad guy. I bet he's done a bank job. You shock him over, and I'll throw up on his knob. So the detectives derail him with shocking behaviour while the sergeant throws up all over his genitalia. The criminal asks, "What have I done?" They say in unison, "Shut up, you slag, you're nicked, my son." Then they clap him in irons and throw him in a cell, slapping each other on the back for a job done well. But the police chief grabs them, really begins to swear. "That's not a criminal," he says, "it's the bloody new commissioner." "Ah, crap," our heroes say after. That telling off really sucked, before retiring to the pub next door to get royally drunk. Thank you. So that is the first one. Very short, as I say, because it's just a kind of thing that I tossed off. I just wrote it very quickly as a thing for them. But then about 5-7 years later, a friend, Kat, hi, if they're watching, I can't remember the discussion, but the phrase was steampunk Mills and Boon. Hell, even I'd read that. And of course, I thought Mills and Boon, steampunk, and I switched them over, and I came up with Mill Steam and Boon Punk. And then I started writing this about them because there were two detectives. But very quickly, when I started writing this, like I said, there was a 7 at least year gap between these two. And when I started writing this one, I suddenly realized it was like connected to the first one. So these became the grandparents of Shock Tales and Vomit from the previous one. So this one gets a little bit weightier now, meatier, because I really got into this one. The third one, bloody hell. But yeah, so I got into this one a lot. So, Detective Millsteam and Sergeant Boonpunk, officers of the law in 1884, they were solving crimes on the Whitby coast with their unseen partner, Conan Doyle's time-travelling ghost. They were a riotous pair with their steamy love affair, and their hedonistic ways elicited a lot of "oh, I says." But their crime-fighting skills could not be denied, so everybody let their indiscretions slide. A quick toke of opium, a swig of absinthe, then let's solve this murder. Doyle's ghost? What do you think? Well, it's obvious, he whispers. She's been sliced like a kipper. I think we've got ourselves a Whitby Ripper. Dun, dun, dun. Bugger, said Boonpunk. What should we do next? Millstein points indoors. Let's have some weird sex. Carnal desires sated, a bit of opium and some wine. Now let's get back out there and solve this dastardly crime. Your sex is weird, said Doyle, a bit afeared. But I wish I was corporeal, so I could join in and cop a feel. Ah, you withers in spirit, giggled the coppers, even if you don't have knobs or knockers. Then they did some detecting and checked out the clues. Whoever the killer was, they were left-handed and wore big shoes. They found some fibres from some kind of white coat, then retired to the pub next door, the old slaughtered goat. Questioning the locals prevail, they were getting absolutely nowhere on a very large scale. Then in walked a harlot, a lady of the night, saw the detectives detecting tale and ran in fright. Doyle's ghost saw it happen, said it could pertain to the case. The other two agreed it could, and our heroes all gave chase. Pursuing through the Whitby streets, hobnails resounding on cobbled streets, coiffed hair blowing everywhere, puffing and panting from the tipsy pair. Conan Doyle's ghost, though, hot on her tail, leaving for the unfit cops an ethereal trail. They followed through the narrow streets Doyle's ectoplasm, while discussing various and interesting ways to give each other an orgasm. Then Mills said, maybe we should keep our mind on the job. Boone said, yeah, but later, let's make love to each other's face. Then they focused on the task at hand and ran and ran and ran. Up streets, down streets, round bends, wondering when the chase would ever bloody end. Doyle, meanwhile, working hard, cracked the dolly mop to the graveyard. And as the knackered detectives coughed and wheezed up the hill, the woman was about to leg it with a will. So Doyle did a thing that's very hard to do. He made himself visible and in a spooky voice shouted, "Boo!" By the time the now sober detectives caught up, she was behind a grave in the fetal position, all curled up. And as they uncurled her and unfurled her from a Victorian clobber, they introduced themselves as Copper and Copper, of the detective kind. They calmed her nerves with a shot from the hip flask, had two for themselves, and said, there are some questions we need to ask. For a while they quizzed her about her fleeing and the death, whilst getting steadily drunker with every swig between every breath. After the interrogation, everyone drunk as loons, they gave her 50 and arranged to meet later for some carnal in the detectives' rooms. Then the human twosome with their ghostly third took themselves to the pub down the hill called the Murdered Bird. And in the tavern they discussed the case and all the facts and came up with a way to catch the killer in the act. Later that night, home bathed and powdered, reclining at their leisure, they awaited themselves with some laudanum, their visiting lady of pleasure. And once she arrived, looking and smelling all fine, she got herself ready to show our heroes a good time. But little did she know they were carnally well read and knew every way to pleasure a person in and out of bed. Their library had the Marquis de Sade, an autobiography of a flea, and they'd even brought back some of those naughty toys they bought in Gay Paris. And despite her years in the oldest profession and thinking she knew a lot, the things that happened in that room that night made her realize she did not. So early next morning, both happy and sore, as she took her leave, she knew she'd be back for more. As for the carnal constabulary, they'd passed on their knowledge of the erotic arts and were as happy as can be. A hearty breakfast, then back on the street. It was time to catch the killer with big feet. They met up with Doyle, the time-travelling ghost, who didn't ask what happened last night. That was something he need not knowest. And they headed to the hospital based upon the clues with all their paraphernalia to measure people's shoes. In the entrance corridor, they marked upon the floor several marks an inch apart and further up some more. Then stationing Doyle's invisible ghost where he could observe the most, the Scarputoo that in up the coast slaughtered lamb roast. Then Millstein got the gins in, and Boone Pump bought some port. Then they proceeded to get very merry and coalesce their thoughts. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, the ghost was by the door, watching everybody's feet for those size 11 or more. Then in walked a brute, a giant amongst men, whose feet were the size of barges and stood at least 6'10". That must be the man, the ghost did think. I'd best go find the detectives and hope they're not loaded on drink. He found them in the tavern, tipsy to say the least, told them of the man he'd seen and said, let's catch this beast. The detectives sobered up with some prescription cocaine, then headed outside to play the end game. Back at their rooms, they argued the toss over who was going to wear the disguise and who would wield the cosh. Millstein lost and got dressed up like Lady of the Night. Boonpunk got themselves tooled up and prepared for a giant fight. They stationed themselves at Doyle's chosen spot and readied themselves for who knew what. Milstein parading like a lady of the night, Boonpunk set up, hidden but keeping them in sight. Time passed, some offers were turned down, because Milstein did look rather pretty in their prostitute evening gown. But this wasn't for fun, for a change, this getting dolled up like a kipper. This was, keep your mind on the job, we're here to catch the Whitby Ripper. So, sore feet later, due to the fancy high shoes, the whole thing was seeming like a really bad ruse. When down the dark alley came that giant of a man, with a face the kind to love that only a mother can. Gladstone bag, top hat and cape, fancy suit and polished shoes, apart from the grotesquerie, rich gent did he exude. Evening, your lordship, Milstein did say. Are you looking for some fun on this pea soup foggy day? The maybe killer did look them up and down, and a smile replaced the frown. Yes, he said, you look very nice. I think I would like very much to get me a slice. Gulp, thought Milstein, but walked with the man arm in arm, knowing that who had their back would keep them from harm. Halfway through the alley, the brute pushed them down, pulled out what looked like a knife and prepared to take another life. Doyle's ghost materialised and put the fear of God into the Ripper's eyes. Boonpunk pounced in a single bound and took the killer down. Milstein got up, took a run up, and gave a kick to the wrongdoer's dick. There you go, son, a tiny taste of your own medicine. The peelers were called, and arrest was made. Thank you, they said. Once again, the day you have saved. Later, in the tavern, the gutted calf, Milstein said, do you fancy a pint? Boonpunk said, not half. Beer was ordered with a spirit for the ghost. Flagons were clanked, toasts were toasted. The doors burst open, an urchin ran in. Murder, murder, the urchin did cry. The Ripper struck again. Ah, shit, our hero said, and proceeded to get extraordinarily pissed. Thank you. So that one was a little bit longer than the previous one because I quite got into that one. So that's the first two parts of the trilogy. I'm going to do the third one separately because I got really carried away with the third one and it's humongous. So I'll do that separately. So that's the first two. Modern day detectives, Victorian detectives, and you next have futuristic detectives. So I shall press stop on this. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the two brief stories. And tune in next time for a rousing ending. Thank you for watching. I'll just scare you with my face while I press stop. Even though I can't find